Jake, could you make me co-host as well?
Since I gave Nick host, I can't.
Gotcha. Nick, could you make me co-host? And same with Jake.
All right, Jake, I think we're ready if you want to start us off.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Hello, everybody. We would like to show you guys this presentation on navigating financial aid award letters, hopefully answer some questions that you may have, as well as give you some more insight. So along with me presenting, we have Nick. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nick Galloway. I'm an outreach assistant for the Utah Systems of Higher Education.
And we also have Dylan. Dylan, would you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Dylan Cafferty. I'm the FAFSA State Coordinator. Good to see you this morning.
All right, and Zora, if we go to the outline, Nick. So this is a quick little outline that we're going to be going over these things. So if you are interested in any of these, pay extra attention, but we're going to go over the award letter, some common and confusing terminology, some concerns and questions that we have exploring award letters and comparing and calculating award letters. The next slide. So first and foremost, we need to go over what an award letter is. So after a student fills out the FAFSA application, the college's financial aid office will send an award letter. So an award letter outlines what is being offered on a federal, state, and institutional level as far as financial aid and scholarships and all that. It includes the cost of attendance and eligibility for different aid, and it calculates the net price of both how much it will cost to go to college and how much aid the student could possibly receive. And they'll usually receive it mid-spring via email, although later if they fill out the FAFSA application later. Yeah. Turn the time over to Dylan.
Sorry, I could not find the unmute button. That it wasn't letting me, but thank you very much for that, Jake. I'm going to dive into now some of the common and confusing terminology that you're going to encounter when you're assisting a student while they're reading their award letter. One thing I always had confusion with when it came to award letters is I'd only ever seen mine. So today I think will be great because then you can get a viewpoint of a lot of different types of award letters that we have throughout the state. So some common terminology that I experienced when I was exploring some of our different examples I wanted to talk about specifically right now is the type of financial aid that the student's going to see. So one of the big main ones is grants and scholarships. Grants and scholarships are considered gift aid and usually don't have any repayment needed unless the student withdraws from school before they finish the semester. As I was exploring the award letters, I noticed that on some of these grants and scholarships, there was a lot of different names. It got a little convoluted. There was acronyms. And so here's some of those examples that I encountered when I was looking at the award letters that students may encounter. And the number one thing you should know when you're assisting the students with this is just if they see that there's a grant or a scholarship, that's all they really need to worry about. They don't need to know the difference between the federal supplemental grant versus a higher ed success stipend grant, unless they really want to dive into that. As long as they know that it's a grant, then they should understand it's free money that they don't have to pay back. And so that's a really important thing to kind of look at. Otherwise, they may get confused, overwhelmed, et cetera. As you can see at the bottom there, there's even grants not even spelled out all the way that I saw on there. So keep an eye out and try to understand the best you can as you're assisting the students too. Some other types of aid that the student will encounter is work study, of course, and federal. They'll have some different names, like, for example, federal work study eligibility, work study UG, which technically that stands for undergraduate, summer college work study. So some different examples there. And work study is work aid, where the student, they'll receive this amount that says, for example, $2,000 on their award letter, but they don't actually get that $2,000 because they receive that aid through their paycheck, because they have to go search out a job that's work study eligible, usually on campus, and then get offered the job, et cetera, and then work to get that aid. Other types of aid the student may encounter are employee, veteran, and other benefits, and that's going to be unique to the student and or their parents, and those will have some different names as well. The student will also see their loan offers, the federal student loans, and they're split up into some major groups here more specifically. So they'll see subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans, Parent Plus loans. Subsidized loans, just a quick refresher here, is basically when the government's going to basically waive the interest while they're in college or while they're enrolled in college, where unsubsidized loans is the opposite, and the interest starts right when the student uses that money and starts accumulating during that time they're in college. And then Parent Plus loans are a little more rare. It's usually for students who are going out of state or to Ivy League schools where they have got, these big costs for college. And usually a parent has to co-sign with that. But do be aware that those will be possibly offered in front award letters. And then private loans, and that'll depend on whatever private loans the student decide to take out with whatever group. So some other terminology that you'll encounter when it comes to calculating the award letter and understanding, please note that all these items I'm about to talk about are usually just estimates given by the college or university. So the student does have the power to change those costs, except for like tuition and fees, which I'll discuss in just a second. But one of the big ones that the student's going to see is their expected family contribution, or EFC, which they get from the FAFSA. And that's basically just an index provided by the FSA to basically determine the eligibility for the aid that the student can receive. So just know that's an index number in a way. Let's see, whoops, too far. Then they're also going to see cost of attendance. I need to update this slide, my bad. And the cost of attendance is going to cover a lot of different things. It's going to have tuition and fees, which that should have been a bulletin point, housing, meals, room and board, books and supplies, transportation, etc. But do know when you're looking at the cost of attendance, the college has, those are split up into two different things. We've got direct costs and indirect costs. Now, direct costs are going to be your tuition and fees. It's the item that the student will be required to provide or to pay to be able to attend the college. The indirect costs are those estimates that the institution has provided of what they think it's going to cost the student, for example, those other items: housing, meals, books, supplies, transportation, etc. And I can tell you those are estimated numbers, and a student does have the power to change that, right? Like if they want to go live at home instead of living on campus, that can cut down costs for housing. If they want to rent books or buy used books instead of buying brand new books, that'll cut down on a lot of those costs. So just understand that when they're seeing these full amounts, that it's estimates. And then some other terms are total financial need. And this is found by taking the cost of attendance and subtracting the EFC, and that'll provide a number that's the total financial need. In addition, they'll see total financial aid offered, as well as net price. And those are some different terms as well. The net price is going to be what they've calculated from the cost of the college that they've estimated, subtract the aid, and that'll provide the amount that the student's expected to provide. And like I said, a lot of the time, these estimates are from the indirect costs. And so that amount is a lot lower than is actually shown. Sometimes it may be more, depending on the situation of the student. So here's a little example from an award letter that we've seen. I'm going to look over here at on the left side with the cost bracket. And that cost bracket has those different costs that I talked about: tuition, books, room and board, travel, etc. And that total there is about $32,000. So that's what the estimate that the college has provided of the total cost for the student to attend. And then that's going to be dropped over into that box on the right, as you can see up on the top. Then it's going to throw in the EFC. And for this student in particular, they have a EFC of about $7,000. And then they have their estimated financial need that's calculated by the college. It gets a little convoluted, right? And can get a little messy. The main thing you need just to understand is the awards. If you're looking at the bottom there, you've got the table and you've got all the awards that's been offered to the student. In this example, we've got grants, work study, and loan. And that total aid that's available is $11,000. And so they're looking at using $11,000, even though there's an estimated financial need of $24,000. That aid will go towards tuition and fees. They get that covered, and then the student will need to provide that extra amount for living, books, supplies, etc. I want to make sure we have time. So we have some great examples later on here. Some other common terminology that you'll encounter while looking at an award letter are different things that students may not understand, like these. Full-time enrollment versus part-time or half-time enrollment. Master promissory note and entrance counseling, usually for students who take out student loans. Dropping and withdrawing classes, accepting and declining offers for their awards, because you can say no to any award that's been offered to you. You do not have to take out a loan. On campus versus on campus, off campus, sorry. Satisfactory academic progress. Nick's going to dive into the SAP in just a second. If you see anything that's relative to Title IV aid, that's usually aid that's provided by the FAFSA or programs associated with the FAFSA. So just be aware that that's aid from the FAFSA. And then payment plan, because the student can set up a payment plan to pay off any extra costs that they need to attend their college. So I'm going to turn the time over to Nick to provide some more detailed information.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. So we're going to go over a couple of questions that you may see as you're helping some of your students navigate their financial award letters. So the biggest one that we see all the time is they receive this expected family contribution as a number stated either from their FAFSA once they complete it and receive their student aid report, or when they're applying to colleges and are receiving financial aid packages and see that number there. So one of the biggest question we see is my family required to provide that set dollar amount? And the answer is no. And sometimes you may see in a lot of your students' cases, that's not realistic for their family to contribute that much to their education. It's the EFC is really just the Department of Education's way of providing a number to the institution to calculate the student's financial aid need and relevance to their cost of attendance. I think Katie mentioned this in the chat, but if a student doesn't feel that the EFC captures their family situation, it can always be appealed to the financial aid office. We saw this a lot during COVID, where a parent lost their job or just a relatively large change in their family situation in terms of what they can contribute. And we always recommend that if that is the case, the student should reach out to that financial aid office, because they do have resources and ways that they can go about that. So this is another thing that we want to warn students about and have our educators such as yourself kind of navigate with our students. We tend to kind of focus in on the hard dollar amount. So we'll look at this kind of scenario where the award letter says they have $14,000 in aid. What does that really mean? And so Dylan, with some of our terminology mentioned earlier, gift aid, work aid, and student loans. And so if we look at our scenario here, we do have our grant here, which is our gift aid. So this is $750 that doesn't have to be paid back. We also mentioned our work study funds. So you might see these where the student applies and receives a part-time job, either on campus or on campus through the work study fund. This $5,000 isn't necessarily given to the student right away. They essentially earn that money in form of a paycheck. So that 5,000 will be kind of withered down a little bit as each week they work, or whenever their pay period is. We also want to note that award letters do have student loans listed on them as well. And so student loans do show up as aid, but they do have to be paid back. And so it's not, in a sense, free money. It is money that you're borrowing now, but you do have the obligation as the student or receiver of that aid to pay that money back in the future. So this is another thing that we see a lot, especially in terms of federal grants or scholarships. So satisfactory academic progress is the requirement that institutions set for a student to maintain the eligibility of their federal aid. It's really important to note that each institution sets this at their own, but some of that may look like a student may be required to take a certain amount of credit hours. They may be required to be full-time, which at some institutions may be 12 credit hours, other institutions it may be 9. It just depends on the institution. A lot of the time, aid, especially federal grants, may be scaled to the full-time status of a student. So if they receive a Pell Grant, for example, and they are considered a half-time student taking 9 credit hours, that can scale to that 9 credit hours, and it may not be the full amount as a full-time student. Another thing that we see in the SAPs, or the satisfactory academic progress, is a GPA requirement. Some institutions may set forth a minimum GPA requirement for students to be continuing on in their education and still moving on. Sometimes if a student needs to repeat a course, that can affect their SAP. But again, it's really up to the institution, and we always recommend keeping in contact with the financial aid office, as they'll be able to help them through that. So we kind of alluded to some of these earlier, but these are some other kind of rapid fire questions that you may see. So what happens to some of this aid if you drop out? If it is a grant and you had finished the semester that the grant money had been dispersed to, you do not have to pay that out. But if it is, say, a scholarship and you drop out partway through the semester, as you didn't complete the course, you may be required to pay that money back. If you can't afford to pay for the tuition after all of your aid is dispersed, Dylan mentioned earlier that most institutions do have a payment plan option for students. It is pretty common for students to pay for their portion of their tuition or fees after aid is dispersed, and most institutions can set that up as a monthly tuition statement or break it out over the course of the semester in equal payments. So the next question is, what are the limits to financial aid? Oh, sorry, do we have a question? No, okay. So what are the limits to financial aid? So financial aid awards are usually stipulated to covering the cost of attendance and applicable fees at an institution. They do not always apply to things like room and board or travel, things like acquiring technology for the use in the classrooms. But there's a caveat with that, which kind of goes to this next question. What happens to all the extra aid? If your student is in the position where they have scholarships that exceed their cost of attendance, the extra aid will first and foremost go to things related to their education, so tuition and fees. But after that, the money can be dispersed to the student directly. And that's where that money can be used at the student's discretion to pay for things like room and board or some of those technologies like a laptop that I mentioned before. Real quick, we're just going to go through exploring a couple of award letters because we do have a couple that we do have written up for us. So our first one is from Tula Tech. Dylan, can you make sure that everyone can see this for me real quick?
Yep, you are good.
Okay. So what we're really going to highlight here is that every college is different. Their financial aid offer may look different in some ways. And so we do want to, along with the terminology that we set forth earlier in this, kind of just look through it really quick. So here's our big one. So we have tuitions and fees right over here. And then we have books and supplies. All this will be added up. So here's their total cost of attendance. And at first glance, it's like, how did we go from, roughly $2,000 to $26,000? And so you'll look over here. The big one is room and board. As Dylan mentioned, a lot of these things are estimates. So if they have a roommate or live at home with their parents, for a less amount or free, that a large chunk of their cost of attendance can be essentially wiped out. You see here our cost of attendance, COA minus EFC, which is our expected family contribution. Again, those numbers net. And then we do have, as Dylan pointed out, some unnet need, or the net cost is what we called it. This is our cost of attendance minus accepted aid, which kind of brings out to the total cost of attendance, which does still include those things like those big expenses like rent. Next, we'll look at Enzyme. So their process is a little bit different. So they do use an online version, which you may see a lot. So this is just kind of a little printout of their web portal. But as we come down here, this is more your award summary that you'll see. So this will be the aid year and their financial totals, broken out by semesters. And then you'll kind of see the more familiar. Here's our estimated cost of attendance. There's your tuition and fees. And so we implore you to go and look at some of these and explore them. We do have a Google share drive set up with examples of a couple of different institutions' financial aid award letters for the state of Utah. And so if you do want to take a look at those and kind of, mentally test yourself, we'll have that set as a link that we'll send to you later. All right, and so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jake, and we're going to have him look over comparing and calculating the award letters.
Thank you, Nick. I'll get right into it. So the biggest thing with this is we want to use the ideas and foundation that we've built on in this presentation to be able to compare award letters. So like Nick and Dylan had said, some of the stuff within the cost of attendance isn't always applicable to certain students, and as well as the aid, they might not receive some of it, they might receive others. So with these two award letters, we have one from the University of Utah, and then the other one is from Dixie State University. So the one on the left is University of Utah, the one on the right is Dixie State University. So with these two, with a specific student, if at the U, they didn't have to worry about room and board, say they were living with their parents, that would be a significant reduction in cost. And it could possibly even change whether or not they go to different schools, because as you can see, the U costs about $7,000 more for the estimated cost of attendance, about $7,000 more than Dixie, but the room and board is around $13,000. So with the cost of attendance, when you are comparing those two, it is very important to understand what is applicable to the student and what isn't. As Dylan and Nick have shown different ways that things can be applicable or not. So that is something very important. And then with that, you also want to apply that same sort of logic to the grants and scholarships. So if they have more scholarships at one school, obviously it'll all be in their financial aid awards, but perhaps they can't receive some of the scholarships. You want to make sure that when you are calculating the cost, which is, cost of attendance minus aid, that you are only adding in the things that are applicable. So if it isn't something that the student is going to receive or have to pay, it doesn't make sense to add it in an analysis. And if you don't know the specific situation, it is good to take it as face value, more or less, as the calculations that we have are the schools provide are usually fairly accurate and representative of what will really happen. So yeah, those are the big things, is making sure that you are only adding in applicable costs, and then you can compare how much the student would want to go to a different school and understanding how much more or less one school would cost than the other. So yeah, basically this section, you want to apply all those tools that we have developed in the things that we've informed you about with cost of attendance and aid, and use it to help students make the best choice for their college experience. Are there any questions about any of that?
Can I add something really fast, Jake? I
Yeah.
love these two examples because if you're looking over on the left with the U, you can see that the total aid amount is a ton of aid, like it's $15,000, where on DSU it's only about $7,000 in aid. And so, but if you look at what the aid is from the University of Utah, there's a big chunk of that is loans in comparison to, there's no loans over on the Dixie side. And then the cost of attendance for the University of Utah is going to be a lot more than Dixie. So comparing those is really powerful, and having the students shop around to see those different costs can really help them make a good decision on where they want to go if they're looking for cheaper. Yeah.
That's a great point. That, yeah, loans are something within the aid department that is something that, yeah, you can suggest that to the student to change the costs. If they really are set on one school, you can add that in, because the biggest thing is we want the students to be able to afford to go to where they want to go. And with the aid, you can see if that really is an option. If the amount of aid, doesn't even come close to, helping with cost of attendance, that might be a sign that another institution may be better. But thank you for bringing that up, Nick, because yeah, loans are something very important to consider because they aren't free, or you don't just get them like you do with a lot of the grants and scholarships. You do have to pay those back. So it is something very important to weigh and let students sort of make that decision and weigh their options and decide with the most information that you can give them. So yeah, that's great.
Another thing I noticed too, Jake, is that with the work study, they over on the left there, that the student will see they've got $5,000 for work study, but they're not going to get that at the beginning of the semester. They're going to have to work that for the whole year. And so the students got to realize, oh, this isn't going to pay up everything right up front at the beginning of my semester. I'm not going to get this until, I'm working through the semester. So helping them understand that too is so important. I love that example.
Yeah, understanding the different types of aids and how they apply is super important, and something that with your students, you should make sure that you're well versed in understanding what the loans are. Is there an option? So there are options for students to take out partial loans with most institutions that I have come into contact with. You usually have to fill out some sort of form or contact their financial aid department, but you can absolutely, if a student wouldn't want to take out as much aid as they've been offered, there's almost always a way to reduce the amount of loans they were offered. With many institutions, you can increase the loan amounts to a certain point, but sometimes that's a little iffy. However, with reducing it, almost always there is an option to reduce the loan amount. And even if they've accepted it and they've gone through one semester, they can reduce the loan amount for the second half of this, for the second semester if they'd like, or they can even cancel it for the second. So usually within the loans, you can contact the financial aid office, and if it has to do with reducing or getting rid of them, yeah, so sorry, going to another question. You can accept the loans if you've declined them with most institutions. You do have to contact the financial aid office, and a form or an email, they'll inform you what you need to do to be able to accept it. Usually the absolute cutoff for accepting any loans or aid is the end of the semester. When it gets later parts in the semester, it gets a little more iffy. But yeah, the student can absolutely contact the financial aid office and accept loans that they have declined or chose not to take out. If they reduced the amount of loans that they want and they decide, oh, I need my full amount again, they can request to go back to the full amount in most cases. So yeah, there are absolutely a ton of options for students as far as loans go. And so it's very important that if a student does, consider wanting to take out loans, but doesn't know how much, that you do have them reach out to the financial aid office, because they almost always have options. And that could really change whether or not a student goes to a certain institution.
I'd like to add too, is that sometimes the colleges actually reduce the amount of loans that are actually used for the student. When I was in graduate school, I used just a small portion of the loans that I was actually offered. I wasn't even aware of it actually at the point, because I went to the financial aid office to request some more aid so I could go on a study abroad. And they were like, oh yeah, you have this huge chunk that you can still use. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that, because it didn't really explain that to me, And so then I appealed for some more aid so I could afford that. But like we like to say all the time, if students can avoid taking out loans, we definitely recommend that, because that investment later on will be better if they're using their other aid first, and working if they can before taking out those loans, just because they have to pay it back later on.
Yeah, and with the other question that was asked, with the summer semester, different schools have different ways to get that to show up. Some schools, as soon as you, a little bit after you register, they will apply onto your award letter. I know that Dixie State often does that, but with other schools, you have to fill out a form to request summer aid. I believe that's what the U does. And so with summer aid, some of the stipulations and changes differ a little bit by institution, but also I believe most of them are regulated fairly similarly. A student, if they want to get their full aid during the summer, I believe they have to go full-time fall and spring, or if they just went full-time spring, they can get their full-time summer. But if they went part-time fall and then full-time spring, usually, at least from my experience, they can only get the half-time amount for the summer as far as aid, but some institutions are different. Generally, you can contact the financial aid office if you aren't sure how to get the summer aid brought up, but with most institutions, you can receive summer aid, and they'll put it on your award letter. You should just contact the institution, but that is most often an option. As far as loans, I believe with most loans, if you have used up your full loan amount, you can request for, as Dylan was saying, they usually reduce the amount that they offer you from the total, so there is more they could offer you. However, if you want to take a loan during the summer, you would need to fill out a form to request that extra amount to be able to take them out. With summer aid, usually it's only the aid offered. So if you want the extra loans, you would have to contact the office and fill out the required forms. But with all this, it is extremely important to contact the financial aid office. With my experience with most financial aid offices, they are usually very helpful and will direct you to whatever you need to fill out. But there are usually options for most of what we're trying to do. Summer aid is very common, and yeah.
And I would say when it comes to that, kind of like almost like an appeal that people work to be able to get access to more of those loans. You can request a certain amount, but the college will only provide a certain amount. I requested a big chunk during my schooling, and they gave me most of that, but not all. And so the college and the financial aid office will have that ultimate say, depending on what you're using it for, et cetera. But,
Yeah, and often if you want to request more, they usually will require that you take out the subsidized and unsubsidized. So that is another difficulty, that when you request more, they usually won't just give it to you in subsidized loan, which is what we prefer. But yeah, contacting the financial aid office, seeing your options, they're usually very well informed and can help you out a ton. Is there anything else that anyone is wondering? All right.
any other major questions that you have as we're just about to wrap up? Anything that might be confusing, et cetera? And we'll give you access in an email, so look out for that email with the sample letters that we have, and you can explore a bunch of the different institutions in there, different award letters, to kind of get a feel for it, especially when you're assisting with students. And some of them you have instructions on where to find their award letter. So. Camilla.
Hi, thank you. I just want to confirm information before I tell my students. Referring to dropout, obviously I do not want that to happen, so I won't even bring it up. But if a student does not finish a semester, do they still have to pay the Pell Grant back after they accepted it? So say they took, I don't know, 2 months and they end up just dropping off as a whole. Is that something I should worry about, telling them to keep an eye out and that they may have to pay back to the school or FAFSA, or how does that process work?
Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, it's going to depend on the institution. Sometimes if they're like almost done with the semester, they may not have to pay anything back. If it just depends on what time in the semester, if it's at like the beginning, they may have to pay part of it back. They may not. It just depends on the regulations that the institution has set up. So yeah, it just depends. And I'd recommend them talking with the financial aid office in that decision making that they will take without dropping out.
Yeah.
And it is important to also note that a lot of the times the institutions understand that life happens and a student may need to drop out seemingly unexpectedly. And in my experience and what we've seen is that institutions are really good at working with students if they do have to pay back scholarship or grant amounts. Most of the time it can be set up in a payment plan.
Yeah. And then with the other question on recommendations, if the EFC doesn't reflect reality, because the parents aren't planning on helping the students. So that is a difficult thing that we run into a lot. With being declared an independent on the financial aid application, for most circumstances, you need to be 24, married, or part of the military. So unless there are unique circumstances like homelessness, abuse, stuff like that, the students will have to remain independent until they fulfill one of those requirements. So that is a difficulty with parents not wanting to help with aid, but it not really reflecting. The students can request, obviously, the full loans, like Dylan was saying, and then also sometimes institutions have, the Parent Plus loan or different loans where they can give the students more aid to help them out. But that is a large difficulty, that if a student is 18, they don't meet any of the unique circumstances, and their parents aren't helping on paying, although it doesn't reflect their actual situation, they don't get aid. So that is a very large difficulty that we have to run into and deal with. Unfortunately, there's not much to do if the situation isn't one of those unique ones where the child can be considered an independent. So super sorry about that. It's a tough one.
And I would say, to answer that, in addition to what Jake has said, if the student's really insistent, they think their situation is very unique and they want to appeal, they can go ahead and appeal with the financial aid office for that EFC number. but I would just warn them beforehand. If it's just because their parents are refusing to assist them with schooling, then there's a high chance that most likely it won't change at all. So.
And just to triple add to the thought, if that is the case where the student is looking to change or look at their financial aid office and changing that EFC, they are going to need to have documentation to back that up. It is very much a process, and it's not a, kind of they said situation. So there will need to be financial forms such as taxes and things like that to kind of corroborate their story.
Yeah, as well as in the cases I've seen, letters from people within the student's life, even from a high school counselor. If the student was homeless, that usually you would need a letter from the high school counselor, as well as other supporting documents like that. So it can be done, and for those students, it is absolutely a avenue that you should help them explore because it can change how much aid they can receive and make college a real option for them. So it does require documentation, and for most students, they need to, these situations are fairly specific, and just because a student moves out after high school, we don't usually consider that. For most of the homelessness type situations, it would need to be during high school that those situations had happened, or while they were under 18. But yeah.
Okay, thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And do know, I just need a quick correction. The phone number that's on here has been disconnected. So if you need to get a hold of me, please email us first, and I'll provide a phone number. But if you haven't been able to get a hold of me for any of your FAFSA questions, just send out an email and I can get in contact with you.
All right, and are we all good to hop off? Okay. All right. Bye, guys.